Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the November edition of Real Talk Transforming Your Energy. My name is Rosemary Domina. I go by Rosie for short. And welcome. This is exciting. Every month I get super excited to bring on someone that they're dear to my heart, and so is this guest today. And let me introduce her first before I start blabbering on about what we're going to talk about, because I think it's applicable to things we've experienced in the last 2 years. And as you know, if you've read the posts I've shared in the past about my journey and healing, what that means to let go, how we evolve and how we grow, this talk is definitely applicable to that process. So if you find yourself in your own process of healing or growing or trying to let something go, this talk can inspire you to move in a certain direction. So that is my hope for today. So I have someone here who is my mentor in the nurse coaching program through INCA, which is the International Nurse Coach Association. Her name is Janet Booth, and she goes by Jan for short. So Jan Booth considers herself a conversation opener about death and dying. She has worked as a nurse for many years at the intersection of quality of life and end of life as a hospice palliative care nurse and as an end of life coach and educator. She serves as faculty for the Integrative Nurse Coach Academy, the Conscious Dying Institute, and the New York Open Center's Integrative Thanologia Certificate Program, and presents workshops on the transformative possibilities of end-of-life care. Additionally, Jan is the author of Reimagining the End of Life, Self-Development and Reflective Practices for Nurse Coaches, and one of the co-authors of Bold Spirit Caring for the Dying. When asked recently by a colleague to sum up everything she's learned over decades of end-of-life studies, Jan replied, "Exploring and talking about our mortality changes how we live." So this is interesting. Hi, Jan. Welcome to
Hey, Rosie. Thank you.
Welcome. I hope I did your intro justice, because when I first met you, I mean, your energy definitely, I was attracted to your energy, and I was really glad to be in your small group during my training with INCA. So that's how Jan and I know each other. She is definitely a mentor to my process of becoming an integrative nurse coach. And for my community, just to remind you, nurse coaches, they just don't coach nurses. We coach anyone. It just depends on the specialty of the nurse coach. And I think that's why nurses, I'm just going to give us props, because we're very valuable in a way. We're very versatile and well-versed in health and how to treat a patient in a way they need to be seen and heard. So just giving props to nurses who are out there tuning in. Because nurses, thank you. But Jan, welcome. Thank you for being live on this talk. And just to give a little bit of background of how she came on to be a guest for this month, because we just agreed on this last week about what this talk was going to be about. So we had a little reunion with some of the nurse coaches from my cohort, from cohort 26 of INCA. And you talked about dying in a way that is interesting. So not dying in the literal sense of, boom, you're gone from this earth and you're physically not here, but dying in a way that helps us to grow and evolve. So let me give an example and why I think it's important to bring it up at this time of the year when things are starting to settle for the holidays and we're heading into the new year. And New Year's, we usually make new goals, make new resolutions, things we want to see. We want to start making changes in our life. And it's the usual time. Time. So as most of you know, if you've been following my journey, I lost my dad suddenly at the beginning of 2019. And when I think back to how it happened, it was very sudden. And I was the one to witness his last action and his last words. And that was something that my dad and I shared together. Of course, it was sad to lose him, and I still grieve about him. This is about almost 3 years later. But it also made me think about my own life. At that moment when I caught my dad in the heart attack, it made me think about my life, and it made me think about all the things that I was doing that I was unhappy with, and asking myself the question, why am I still holding on to things that no longer serve me? And so that at the time was about my career and where I was working as a nurse practitioner, about the relationships I was still holding on to, whether it was a personal relationship or an intimate relationship that I knew wasn't fully serving me. So I was doing things for the wrong reasons. And seeing my dad the way, again, that it happened, made me realize I need to start making choices that truly fulfill me. And that process in going through 2019, I was ill, not just mentally and emotionally from the grieving, but it was the first time I hit, a clinical depression. I was very sad. I was suicidal, but also my body physically transformed into I didn't even recognize myself. Let's just say I saw many specialists. Some thought I had cancer. It was an unknown thing. I had so much inflammation, fatigue that no one could really explain. But I think looking back at that process, I was starting to let go of the things that no longer served me. So hence, I was, that part of me was dying so that something else could come into place and grow, because I was ready to let that part of me go. So that's the background I want to give to this talk. It's about how we can die while we live to make room to grow. So Jan, please take it away.
Oh man, I just want to hear you keep talking about it.
No, this is about you. No.
Oh, but that's so perfect, Rosie. You know, thank you for sharing that. It's so perfect because that really is a beautiful example of why I'm doing the work I'm doing right now. I started many years ago in the late 80s working in hospice, because back then, if you wanted to work at end of life, which is what I felt very strongly, pretty much hospice was the only place to go. So what I've been doing over the decades is I've been, like we say in nurse coaching, I've been following the thread, you know, following where my passion is going, where my interests, where my own life is changing and transforming. And I started with care of the dying, literally hands-on. I love the hands-on bedside nursing of people in hospice. And it was a great training ground. And a couple of things came out of that affected the path that I ended up being on. I didn't plan, 35 or more years ago, well, I'll do this and then I'll do that and then I'll do this. I've been like tracking, paying attention to where I'm being called. So it was a great place to start. It was really good learning territory to physically care for dying people and their families. And what came out of that so clearly was how really unprepared most families were. They were caught off guard. They were unsure how to navigate this time. There were a lot of regrets. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of looking back saying, I wish, right? So I felt like, well, I want to be part of opening the conversation about dying, because clearly I was very aware that we were living, at least here in the United States, we're living in a general culture that's really reticent to talk about death and dying, let alone grief. So you've already, in your initial words, you've already broken lots of cultural taboos right there. You're cutting, you're going, you're countercultural, you're a rebel, because you spoke so beautifully and openly about death of your father, about grief, about the impact of grief, and about how it changed how you live.
Yeah.
And that's really where I have been following the path, is not only do I care about families and individuals talking more openly about dying, because otherwise we don't do dying very well in our healthcare system. We do it well in hospice and palliative care and a few other places, but we don't, that's not our strength. I think our strength as a healthcare system, if we have one anymore, is acute care. That's what we specialize in, but chronic care and end of life care, people don't talk about it. People aren't realistic. And there's this kind of collusion. I won't talk about it. You won't talk about it. The healthcare team won't talk about it, right? So what happens is that people have these kind of medical technological deaths where they end up on machines and or at the very last minute coming into hospice. So I know we can do better. I'm interested in a conversation that helps people to think ahead of time what matters most to them. Where do you want to be in your last days, weeks, and months? Who do you want there? What's the quality of that time? But where I'm moving now is really where you moved, which is not just the care of dying people, but how does the conversation on a more regular basis change how we live? And can we move from talking about loss and smaller deaths of our lifetime, like you did, and not be afraid to talk about those things, because inevitably when we do talk about the parts of our lives or the relationships or the work or the ideals that are dying, that means something's going to change.
Yes.
And there's a lot of fear of change, even though one of the fundamental truths of life is impermanence.
Yes.
Many,
absolutely.
Most of us are uncomfortable with that, right? Mm-hmm. Change is hard. Even if I really don't like what's happening, it's familiar. So to me, talking about dying is so much more than the care of the dying, although that's a really important piece. But it's really about these bigger questions of becoming more awake and aware in my life, as you did. Something woke you up. And it often is for people the death of someone or serious illness or sudden death that jolts us, shocks us, awakens us, that I don't want to. Maybe I still could keep going on automatic pilot, but I don't want to. Something has rocked my life enough that I realize, oh my gosh, I have choices. What meaning do I want to give my life? I could be gone like that, like my friend in an accident. I could be gone like my dad. I could be, we all have many examples. So I'm really drawn to those kinds of things, like meaning and purpose and intentionally living as much as we're able to. So that's sort of where I'm moving, is still very much an advocate for compassionate and thoughtful and proactive care at the end of life. And I'm loving the way those conversations, the more they open, the sooner they open, the sooner back in the trajectory of our illnesses they open, how all of that changes how we live.
Oh, absolutely. These are the conversations I love having in general. And I think, even you said that everything changed and nothing's permanent, which is true. And you're right. And I think you're also right in saying that most people are uncomfortable with change, and they stay in the same place. I think some people are not even aware of that. If you stay in the same place, it doesn't mean it's not going to change. It's just going to become masked in another way, but they're essentially going through the same thing. That makes sense.
Right.
How do you think, and I would say in these times, especially with the pandemic, I do believe that people were forced to look at their stuff. And I know some people had to make ends meet. So that's one subset of issues. Because of the pandemic, you lost your job, restaurants were closing down, businesses were closing down, people were losing their jobs. But for most people, especially that I've encountered going back into work as a nurse practitioner, the rates of anxiety, depression, panic attacks were going up. And the common theme I've heard from my patients was that they couldn't sit with themselves.
Yeah.
So what do you think can help folks who are starting to recognize that a change is needed? Where do they even start? And I know that sounds like there's no clear answer about that. But based on your
50,000 answers,
there's 50,000, or there's infinite ways people can approach it. But for someone who is starting to recognize, you know what, I'm not happy with where I am. I feel depressed and I'm stuck. And based on your experiences of working with hospice and palliative care, where do you think the conversation can begin? How can someone start their journey? I know I'm trying to think of a very specific way to answer that question, but some people just need to start somewhere. How would you guide someone in that process?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm answering so much from my experience in hospice and palliative care. I'm thinking more kind of how that has all come together in my own coaching, and helping people who feel stuck and don't know how to start, know where to start. One of the things that I've seen be really helpful, especially when the spark of life is really dim. I'm just kind of going through the motions, right? And I'm not talking here about deep clinical depression, more the kind of levels of sadness and dissatisfaction and disenchantment with life, where we still have some energy to move and find some of that life energy again. Anyway, thinking back to a time when that person has really felt alive. And for some people, it's going back to their childhood, but not everybody. Some people came more alive after their childhood. Maybe their childhood was full of trauma and they came alive later. But for many people, they can go back to being younger when they felt freer, they felt more themselves. Maybe for some people, it's more towards the beginning of a career. I work a lot with nurses. So often going back to that early feeling of, why did I go into nursing? What was that? Because I think when we can tap into those places that are still in us, we can build on those rather than trying to feel like I have to be a different person in order to be happy. Or I have to be.
Repeat that one more time. Yeah. I think that's a misconception. People are just like, I want to just start brand new.
Yeah, that's right. I want someone else's life. Well, and God knows, in giant parentheses here, God knows that social media does not help that, because there's so much fake stuff going on of, oh, this is my life, so there's even more pressure, I think, to want something different than what you have. But finding a way to tap into something that is uniquely you, that involves a joy or a sense of connection to other people, or a connection to work, or an avocation. For some people, it might be remembering that they used to sing in a choir. Other people, it might be, as a kid, I spent so much time outdoors, but I never go outdoors anymore. I mean, we could all come up with lots and lots of examples, but finding those places where there was a quality of life that you want to recapture and building on that. So if you're someone who used to play music and you stopped 20 years ago, it might be picking up an instrument again, or singing. Or for some people, it might be getting themselves outside more and feeling a connection with the natural world. Anyway, so I would start with something that is not outside of a person. Oh, here, go do that thing, and then you'll be happy. But to start here, because all of that is still in there. It's that it's gotten pushed down, it's gotten forgotten. Many of us, in what my young adult children call adulting, things get pretty serious. You might be raising kids, you got a job, you got to go every day to the job. There's a lot of serious stuff in there that can take us away from some of that. And I think what happens in the wake-up call of people who get a serious diagnosis that is life-threatening and life-shortening, the wake-up call is a really good discernment of what matters and what doesn't matter. And a lot of what matters is, I want to feel more joy. I want to feel more connected to people. I want to prioritize the people I care about. I want to smell the flowers and have my hands in the dirt of my garden. I want to, fill in the blank, all kinds of things. So rather than wait for that wake-up call, which will come for all of us in some way, it'll be the death of someone, it'll be our own illness, it'll be something serious, that will happen anyway. But rather than waiting for that, how about taking some of that same spirit of waking up to the preciousness of life and bringing it into the current moment, and starting small, not feeling I have to completely do a life makeover. But you, just like we do in coaching, right? You start on something that's strong already and a beautiful part of that person's humanity, and you build on that, and you make a plan so that you can sustain it and not get distracted and fall asleep again. So that's one path.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to pause you for a second, because we do have some people who are on with us live. So for the folks who are joining us live, in the comments section, give me something, or give us something, what brings you joy? What naturally brings you joy without hesitating? It just makes you smile from the inside out. And I'm curious to see that people can start commenting on it.
Well, Rosie, what would be something for you?
Oh my, let's see. You know what? It's dance. And so and you know that, Jan. I mean, I do.
Dance. You've been my dance teacher, dance mentor.
Dance is something that brings me joy, and I will be. I'm very transparent and honest about my process. But when I really started diving deeper into my healing journey, my creativity started to diminish, and so something I'm reevaluating and reminding myself are the things that do bring me innate joy, and dance is one of them. And I will do this soon, I miss creating choreography. And before creating choreography, it would just come to me instantly because I was authentic in my action and in my thoughts of when I'm in the zone. Lately, it's been hard to do that, but I'm also, just like you said, taking the small steps to rebuild. Beautiful. Not even rebuild, but to build something new from what already existed.
That's right.
I'm not trying to rebuild something that already, or try something new and just build something that doesn't exist. Not at all, because I already know for multiple times in my life how dance has pulled me out of the lowest lows. My partner knows that. So yeah. She's right next to me. Right. She's like, well, but dance is what brings Rosie joy.
Well, and what I love in what you just said is, that you're wanting to bring that into your life as your life is now. And I think that's really important, particularly after the last couple of years that we've had that have been such a strange time, is we have all changed as a result of this pandemic, all in a myriad of ways. I mean, every one of us has changed in a variety of ways. And depending on what your situation has been, what your beliefs are, all kinds of things. This pandemic has changed us. So starting with who I am now and what wisdom I have learned from this time, and take the opportunity that I see a lot of people doing. I think you even alluded to this in your patients. Take the opportunity of this last couple of years that shook us up a lot to commit to a path of well-being is really how I think of it, that you want to put yourself on, because we've had a chance to reevaluate. And so build on the life that is now. This whole idea of going back, I hope we don't go back. First of all, there was a lot that wasn't working with back, but that would be ignoring what we have been through, including the suffering of what we have been through and are still going through. That to ignore the lessons of that, I think, is a mistake, because it can be a chance to give us a jump start.
Oh, you said it right. Hold on. I want to share with you what folks are sharing here. Yeah. So we have Denise, who shares calming my mind to feel the quiet place inside. Beautiful. Rachel Rose says glitter.
Beautiful.
Una says dancing and my family. And I think you brought up something interesting with that last statement. How do we live peacefully while we suffer or feel suffering and feel pain? But something else I want to also highlight is that these moments when they come up, so I'll call the moments of adversity when they come up, I believe are opportunities where we can learn. Yeah. It's not just coming at you because life is bad and the universe wants to make you feel bad or any of that. It's more of an opportunity to say, here's another chance for you to learn this X, or what the lesson is in this case. So it's so I'm blown away by the depth of your conversation of what this means to how it's healthy to let go, how important it is to let go.
That's right. It's like shedding. Some of if you live in a culture where death is bad and not to be talked about, then even the metaphors around death are suspect. But there's so many incredible metaphors, like the shedding of the skin, or it's in the end of life world. A lot of times we use the caterpillar butterfly thing, because one fascinating part about that is that when the caterpillar is on the journey towards becoming a butterfly, first of all, it probably doesn't even know what's happening, but it's just going along and feeling changes and making changes. But there is this point when it gets into I'm going to forget the words. Maybe one of you knows it, or maybe Rosie, you do. I think it's the pupa or whatever that thing is, where it's in a little sac. It actually doesn't stay as a caterpillar and start growing wings. It disintegrates into a whole new form, almost gelatinous. So no longer caterpillar, not yet butterfly. And I just have to imagine that it is somehow in its own unique state of being, trusting this process. You know, we think so much with these beautiful brains we have. They take us some amazing places, but they also really can be prisons in how we limit ourselves. So I'm not sure why I got off on the track of talking about the butterfly, but you know, the metaphors of what can happen when we allow things to die. Shedding skins, and what's under that is new skin, or like a snake, right? Shedding a skin. So, you know, it can't be a mistake that in all of the natural world, dying is built into the very model of life. A tree grows, and a tree is beautiful in its fullness, and a tree ages, and a tree dies, and the tree dies, and it becomes part of the ground that then nurtures new plants, right? And we see it all throughout the natural world. And in fact, one of the things I often will encourage people to do who are really struggling around issues of death and dying or fear of dying is to spend more time in the natural world. And just start noticing, where are things new? Where are things aging? Where are things way past their peak? Where are things dying? What happens in the natural world when things die? Because all of this is like a different, like imagining, you know, I use that word in my book, reimagining, very purposely, because I think when you've grown up, as many of us have, with such a limited understanding and a lot of fear around dying, we have to use our imagination to think, is there something positive in this conversation? And so looking at metaphors, looking at analogies in the natural world, looking at spiritual traditions, looking even at what our human social scientists have learned about the purposeful stages of life. You know, what is it that we're sort of meant to be doing in the life of a human? There's certain tasks and understandings and wisdom that grows when you're a baby to a child, to a teenager, to a young adult, mid-adult, if you live a whole lifespan. And not everybody does, of course, but I'm really interested in all these kinds of things that bring richness and texture and layers to the conversation that otherwise is so limited to, doctor, do everything you can to make sure none of us die. And that just pains me, because guess what? Every single one of us is going to die. So how does that help us? It's sort of this, you know, we say it kind of jokingly in the end of life world, but talking about death is not going to make you die any sooner, just like talking about sex is not going to make you pregnant. You know, it's like this whole taboo that leaves us out of a really rich conversation. And one of those conversations is the one we're having tonight, which is, how does talking about dying change then my commitment to my life?
Can you repeat that question one more time? I think I want to highlight that, because that is an important question to ask yourself.
How does talking about, and let's make it personal. Let's not just talk about the rest of you will die. Let me talk about my own dying. All right. Okay. How does my talking about my own death change how I live and change my commitment to how I live? Could be gone at any time. You know, so it's hard, even when you have that realization, I think, to know, well, where do I go? I'm unhappy in my job. I'm unhappy in my relationship. I'm not sure who I am. I feel like I'm a robot going through the motions. You know, it's like, where do I start? And that's, as coaches, I'm not just trying to put a plug in here for coaches, but maybe I am, I don't know. That, you know, sometimes that stuckness is, we can work through ourselves. Yes. And nowadays there are so many amazing books and podcasts and inspiring TED Talks and things that can help us, you know, kind of reimagine. One of the places that I think so many of us get tripped up is sustaining that energy of wanting to change and stay awake. It's like sustaining that is really challenging. And that's where it's helpful to have some shorter term goals instead of just the long vision. And it's really helpful to have people around you, even just one person who gets where you're trying to go, who wants you to be more alive and more who you are, who isn't going to hold you back, who isn't afraid to talk about some of the hard things like the grief and the pain and the trauma that's holding me back, or the fear that's holding me back, you know, that isn't afraid to have that, even just one person. And, you know, to encourage you that this is a worthy thing, to push yourself out of your discomfort, and even sometimes out of your comfort.
Yeah. No,
you know, takes energy. It's like, you know, we're using the metaphors of dying and birthing. I mean, birthing is hard work. Birthing yourself again and again, birthing your love of life when you've lost some of it is hard work. So I don't pretend at all. I know for me, it's an ongoing commitment. And I have ups and downs in my ability to stay sustained. One thing I can say that I think really helps is to work in end of life and with issues of death and dying all the time, keeps it right in front of my face. And I've often, like half jokingly, said, I wonder if I chose this work as much to keep myself awake as to be of service to other people.
Oh my, Jen, hold on. Woo, okay, I have to take a moment to take a deep breath. I mean, if anyone's tuning in live, the last 2 minutes of her talk, that's a lot to digest. For anyone who is tuning in for the replay, or if you're live, rewatch just those last 2 minutes as well, very, very closely, and just listen to it slowly. You said a lot of wise things that we don't think about, but you're also acknowledging the hardship of what it means to live life. I think, and I'm just going to say this because compared to other cultures of just the concept of death, I think in America, we're scared of death. Instant gratification is the key. Unfortunately, looking at yourself is not the way to go. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've met that they're going through depression or anxiety, that they don't see themselves as the first person to look at. They run to a medication first for the quick fix. So a lot in our culture, I'm not sure. I mean, I've only been living on this earth for 36 years. So you've lived this life.
You've learned a lot in 36 years. Hey.
Yeah, I will say yes. There are a lot of things that have been slammed at me over and over and over again. I mean, that's another talk for another day. It's
the life in your years, not the years in your life. All right.
Okay, you called me. She called me out, guys. I was corrected by the wise Jan. Thank you. No, thank you for putting that into perspective. But I think helping and guiding people to look outside of that. But also, I do agree, finding the support, finding that one person who can look at you for you, hold space for you to transform and not judge it. And I think a lot of us, we don't have that. Yeah. And sometimes you need that other person because maybe you're also very self-critical and judgmental of yourself that you can't see past that too, but you know that there's something else there.
That's right. So, and sometimes letting those parts of ourselves die off means that there are people who are going to die off. There may be even groups.
Exactly.
Right? Yes. It's that whole thing of, if you want to, there's so many sayings around this. All these corny sayings are coming to me now that I've started thinking about butterflies, except now it's eagles. If you want to fly like an eagle, you can't hang out with turkeys. And, you know, so we have all these expressions that give voice and help us name these things. And, you know, if I'm trying to emerge into more fully who I am in the time that I have left on the planet, I want people to be around people who will be in one way or another cheering me on. And I want to do that for those people in my life. I want to not be afraid of their growing. I want to be championing them. I want to hold up people, because this is hard, at least I think, in my experience on the planet. Being human is not easy.
Nope.
And to really, you know, whatever your belief system is, we all have a variety of beliefs about our time here. In the way I look at it, I came here to learn things that I can only learn in human form. And I don't want to waste it. Not that I don't go down rabbit holes on the internet and, look at the voice auditions, way much more time than I should be, or looking at old music videos. I can get lost as much as anyone else, but I know that this life is a gift, and I know it will be over at some point in this form. And I know that there are things I value and love and cherish about this life. And I don't want to be filled with regret at the end. Not that I've done everything or felt everything or loved the way I wanted to love, but that I kept moving in that direction. And that's what in some ways, the fear of regret can be a motivator.
There's a question that came up for you in the chat, but I want to come
back
to that.
Get me off the analogies.
No, I love it. Keep going. But we have Christina, who is joining us live. Hi, Christina. Thank you for being here with us. And she has a question for you. Do you have a ritual you do every evening and morning to keep yourself grounded?
Yeah, well, one very practical thing that I do in terms of being grounded is literally to walk on the ground. I walk every day, often first thing in the morning, sometimes mid-morning, not only because it helps me to feel embodied, not just in my head, but to feel my body moving on the ground. But I love being outdoors. And where I'm living in Colorado right now, and I'm near some mountains, and I am grounded and inspired by looking at the hills, looking at trees, looking at the changes in the seasons. So for me, being outdoors and walking is a really important ritual. Rituals of gratitude, sometimes I do them first thing in the morning before I get out of bed, especially if I'm having a hard time getting out of bed. Like, what am I grateful for about the day ahead? What am I looking forward to? And it feels even more natural for me at the end of the day to just lie in bed and to go back over, what are 2 or 3 things that I'm really grateful for. So those 2 things are essential for me. They're not just like, well, if I have time, I'll do them. They're essential. And, that attitude of gratitude is helps me in many, many ways. And the embodied sense of being part of the natural world and being inspired by what's happening around me. It also brings me, when I'm walking and when I'm looking at things, I'm looking at the grass, I'm looking at the trees, the clouds in the sky, I'm looking at people, I'm looking at houses. When you do that, you can't be somewhere else. And it's easy for me to get distracted. But when I'm paying attention outdoors, I'm not just being inspired by the natural world and the sky and the sun and everything, but it keeps me present. And if I can start my day off with that energy of being present, that's my meditation. I sometimes listen to inspiring talks. Like right now, I'm listening to a wonderful series on Christian mystics that I'm finding really nurturing in certain ways. So, and sometimes I will just take that quiet time listening to music or just quiet meditative time. But what I know works best for me that I do on an everyday basis is the walking and being outdoors.
Love it. Thank you. No, thank you for sharing that. Anyone who's live, I'm going to put this back on you for a second to give Jan a little water break. But any rituals that any of you have that you do in the morning or night, or any ritual throughout the day that helps you to feel grounded, brings you back to center, please share. Sharing can inspire someone else who is also live, but also who will watch the replay if they're trying to find something for themselves. So I'm curious to see what you guys got. For me, let me share I do have a morning.
I wanted to ask you, Rosie.
So for my body to wake up more gentle awakening, I do, my partner and I call them the old lady exercises, but it's just like passive range of motion for all of my joints just to help wake things up.
Nice.
I am a firm believer in affirmations, and I'm huge on that. And I do that to help remind me of who I am And I find that if I do these affirmations in the mirror and I remind myself of who I truly am, it helps me throughout my day. So no matter what kind of curveball is thrown my way, if someone pisses me off, if a patient's too complex to see and it just drains me, I remind myself of who I am. And that helps to give me some energy and power in the moment, to be present and to stay grounded. I do meditate sometimes in the morning, sometimes at night, but I find that meditation, so I try to hit mind, body, and spirit. The spirit part of it is the meditation and listening to music while I meditate, just on what's that? There's like an app that I use for meditation, but
is it Calm?
It's not Calm. It's actually it's called Insight Timer. Yes, that's what it's called. Nice. Insight Timer, and it's free.
There's so many good ones now.
Beautiful, but that helps me to get back into my more spiritual sense and remind myself of who I authentically am once I take everything else out of the picture.
That's
but it took beautiful. But I do want to say it had taken me years to find what truly works. And I think what you also mentioned, I have to try multiple things and practice. And there are things that didn't work for me. Like there wasn't, I had to let that go. I did it because someone else was doing it. Yeah. I personally have a hard time reading books. As much as I love them, it takes me a while to read a book and to be fully focused. So it's things that I try. I mean, people are like, you should read this book and read that book. It's inspirational. And I believe them, but reading books doesn't work for me. It's like listening to music. I'd rather listen to someone read the book to me.
Right. That auditory sense is very strong in you. Yeah. So I'm thinking also, like, why these practices that we hopefully find for ourselves matter, and why they make a difference. Like, how do they affect our well-being? And I know that some of these practices for me are what help me to stay present in the moment with what is. So if I'm walking and I'm feeling like, oh man, I did not sleep well, my lower back is hurting, I don't try to just run away from that. I like notice, listen, my back is hurting today as I'm walking, or wow, it's really cold today. And just sort of noticing what is, because I think one of the biggest things that I know I have seen in so many other humans get tripped up over is what I think is at the heart of suffering. And that is to deny or to want to change what is. And there's so many ways we can do that. So some of these practices that are to help us stay in the present. They're not just about our cardiovascular system, although that's a great benefit. They're not just about calming the mind or elevating the spirit, although those are all really important things. So to say just makes them sound like they're small. But I think this ability to really be here is what then we train in these smaller moments to be here, so that when the stuff hits the fan and life gets really hard on any level of our being, then we have some practice of not just running away or numbing ourselves. And I look around at my fellow Americans right now, and I feel like we are a giant experiment in running away and numbing ourselves. Overwork, overeating, over medicating, denying what's happening to the planet, not paying attention to what goes into our bodies, addictions of all kinds that are keeping us from being able to feel what is. And it seems like that's a starting place. It's like the wake-up call that someone with a serious diagnosis gets. It's like the wake-up call of someone hitting a bottom in the world of addiction. It's like, what is happening there? I'm interested in exploring those things and listening to the stories of people who have been changed by those moments of recommitting to their lives. And almost always, I think, we change from hard stuff happening to us. We don't change and transform and recommit to our lives when things are comfy. At least that's not what I see. So it's hard to it's not like I'm trying to make something sort of cute and pretty and fluffy out of suffering. It's that I want to look right at these things, just like I want to look right at dying, because there is something rich inside. And I know that because I've seen it in my own life. I see it in other people. The wisdom leaders of our times tell us, the prophets and the wise people from the past have told us, that there's a journey in suffering. It's not a destination. It's a journey. And in the hardest parts of those journeys, the suffering where I can't find my way out, I don't see my way out, I don't understand what the meaning or purpose is, I don't think I can change, I feel unworthy. We all know these places in ourselves, we all have them, where it feels like this is what life is, rather than some sense I have from having researched this like a student of life, that, this is the suffering time of this particular journey. And there are things that I can do to move myself through them, just like any really good story. And I think we have made it so much harder on ourselves in the general American culture, because we are in such an individualistic culture. We're not in a collective culture like most of the world. I mean, we are. There are many pockets, there are many cultural traditions within this big American culture where community is still intact. But I think there has to be a connection between a sense of isolation and being on my own trying to figure something out, and our incredible increase in anxiety and depression.
Interesting. The first thought that came to mind was, the word embarrassed.
Same
fear, one. Yeah. Fear of or shame. That's another one that comes up, why people isolate themselves, because if they bring something to the surface, it changes the perception of what others think of them.
Yes.
So those are the ideas that came to mind when you expressed that.
And those are such important words, Rosie, because what happens when I can acknowledge and then speak out loud those places where I suffer, the places of guilt, the places of shame, of humiliation. If I don't have a place to give voice to that, where does all that go? And there's a wonderful book that has really meant a lot to me over the years, called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, written by Francis Weller. And within it, he talks about this concept of 5 gates of grief. The grief we typically talk about is a grief of losing someone we love. And the first gate he actually calls the loss of everything and everyone whom we love. But there he speaks of these other 4 gates, and I won't go into it here because it's a longer conversation, but they are gates that look at things like shame and ancestral trauma and grief that we inherit. All these griefs that we don't even know we're carrying, because we've limited the conversation about grief to just the death of someone, just like we've limited the conversation about dying to just those last moments of my life. And we talk about DNRs and advanced directives, but we don't talk about all the dying that is necessary as we live our lives, and how I want to come into the last part of my life with some sense of a sense of completion in some way. So it's like all these conversations are connected about, I guess I would say it comes under the umbrella of what does it mean to be human, and what is this human journey all about? I've happened to focus a lot of my own professional life on the end of life. But for me, when I say I'm a conversation opener, it's because the conversations that come out just like we're having tonight are about so much more than death.
Mm-hmm.
They're about how to stay awake. They're about, what do I do with my suffering? What do I do so I don't feel so isolated? How do we create a different sense of community where caregiving is not so isolated and lonely and such hard work? You know, how do we bring the reality of illness, mental illness, physical illness, spiritual illness more into the center of things and not off to the side like an embarrassment, you know? So those are, you know, I mean, you can see I like I'm a student of this because I'm fascinated by it. And I apparently have a life that is still going. And so I still have time to learn. And I know the more that I engage with these questions, the better chance I have of staying awake. And that seems to matter to me because I seem to have more capacity for joy. I seem to have more capacity for compassion, for appreciation of the small things of life as a result of taking on some of these other things. It's like the grief and joy are totally intertwined. You know, awareness of the shortness of life is completely intertwined with a sense of gratitude.
Oh my, Jen. Oh, I was going to say, some patients I have spoken to personally about depression, especially depression. And when I hear other folks I meet, whether it's patients or friends, about losing a loved one, because I can relate to that personally. Like I always describe grief like love. It's a concoction of feelings that we go through, and it hits you at the most random times. And I bring up the word grief again, because I always ask the question for someone who's holding on to something, why not let yourself grieve? Why not let yourself just feel that instead of holding it back? Because you already know that holding it back, I always use this analogy, it's like putting your hand on the hot stove. You already know what that feels like and it's uncomfortable. Why just not feel that? I mean, that's another conversation for another day, but you talk about grief. Part of letting go and is grieving. And part of that dying process while we're alive is grieving something that doesn't work. I think grief is not, I think in the American culture is not widely accepted as a solution. And it can answer a lot. That's my opinion. I only say that, I say that from professional experience of witnessing and holding space to patients and clients, but also in my own process. In order for me to get through my dad's death and be where I am today, to even have this conversation with you and stay sane and be clear about my own journey, was because I had to grieve all of the anger and sadness and darkness that was existing at my life at that time. And it just wasn't my dad. I told there was a job that wasn't healthy. There were things and relationships that were toxic that I had to let go of. But I felt like there was no other option, because the other option for me would have been burnout. Probably would have led to some chronic illness. And I was only, I'm in my 30s. I'm like, that was the only other choice at the time. So the new thing to try was like, you know what, let me just, let me lean in to my own process.
That's right. And, you know, in some of the classes I teach, we talk about this as grief literacy, and that we are, many of us, grief illiterate. We don't know what it is. We just know we don't want to feel it. Or there's this belief that if I go into it, I'll never come out. It's like a dark hole, I'll never come out. And what I love in your story, Rosie, is that you leaned into it even without knowing what it meant. You didn't have like, oh, well, if I do this for 2 days or for 2 weeks or 2 years, then everything will be fine. It's not prescriptive in that way, but something in you had such a, you know, you felt there was no other choice, you know, right? So you leaned into this thing, which has taken you on a whole nother journey. And I mean, there's going to be suffering no matter what. I'd rather have the suffering be on a path towards well-being and fully embodied in this life, and take on the suffering in that sense of a full life, rather than to try to navigate suffering, which is going to happen anyway, in this kind of narrow, dry life where I'm cutting myself off from so many feelings. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh, it does. It's like taking a leap of faith, not knowing. I mean, I was having a conversation with someone earlier today about what it means to lean into the process of I'm just going to use it in simple terms, like in mental and emotional health in particular. There is no algorithm to it. Right. But that's also the beauty in it. I think most people forget that you can create your journey. You can have that vision of what you want. It's there as long as your intention is behind it. Your action, right. The intention is there, the action will follow. That's right. But you're right. The hardship of it will also exist at the same time. So,
absolutely, absolutely, and that's just part of life. Mm-hmm. That's just part of life. And what I love about this conversation too, Rosie, is that I think part of the way through is by sharing with other people, mm-hmm. being mm-hmm. willing to be vulnerable, talk about what's hard in our lives. But that's only part of the conversation. The other part is looking, who are the people who inspire you? Mm. And I don't mean the people who have the perfect lives. And again, forget social media and all the cute pictures, but like, who are the people who just seem to really be in their life, who maybe they emanate joy, or the way they connect with people is something that you admire, or maybe the way they get lost in the creative process, you feel like, I want to know that flow again, whatever it is. It's like, go to those people, talk with them, talk with your friends about what makes you come alive. It's that wonderful quote. Geez, I shouldn't start a quote and not be able to say it.
It's okay. Take your time.
But it's the quote from Howard Thurman, where he talks about, we don't need people out there saving everyone's life. We need people who have come alive. That's what the world needs. And so, I mean, I think it's in talking about these things and sharing our stories that we not only realize that, yes, everyone has their own suffering, but also everyone has a longing to feel fully alive. Everyone, even the people most unlikely, even the people who you might look at and think they have it all figured out, or you look at the people who seem like they've lost their lives, somehow. It's like, so can we help make it a little easier for each other by showing up a little more human with each other? And it's hard to know if you haven't had that modeled, if you have been shown a whole different way of being. Sometimes it takes crisis to have this break open in your life. That wonderful saying from Rumi that Leonard Cohen put in a song, and we used to sing it with the nurse coaches: forget your perfect offering, ring the bell that you can ring. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through, right? So it's like somehow we've got to be cracked open. We've got to be cracked open to let the light in, to live these more genuine, authentic lives that so many of us are longing for, even if we don't use these, big picture words like I'm throwing around,
Absolutely.
Anyway.
No, Jan, you said it beautifully. And you know what? We've actually reached an hour, just FYI. This is how, yeah. So, Jan, okay, I am blown away by you. I always have been. But I hope for those who are joining us live, if you're joining us live and you have questions, feedback, or comments, put them in there now. Amy says, Jan is an inspiration. Una says, wow. I mean, there's different... You're inspiring people by sharing your story and your perspective. So thank you so much for taking the time tonight to share a very different idea of dying. And again, this comes at the opportune moment where we are ending 2021. It's the holidays. Yeah. A new year is coming. Thinking about things that we want to let go of. And this is a question, I asked to our fellow coaches during that reunion, our global Zoom reunion, but what do you want to embody in 2022? And then my word that came up was courage, and you came up with one too, from what I remember. Do you remember what yours was?
Oh dear, I'm sure I wrote it down, Rosie. Oh my gosh, what was it?
Oh, it's okay. I remember because you're I wish I had written yours down.
I have it written down somewhere.
It's all good. It's all good. If you remember it, put it in the, in the comment section for the video feed. But before we officially go offline, what do you have coming up for you? Is there any opportunities to watch you teach live? Are you teaching anything? You could mention more about your book. What are ways that people can get in touch with you if they want to speak with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest way to get in touch with me at this point, I'm redoing a website that just has all the ways, places I'm teaching and recordings and things like that. So I don't have that yet. But probably the best way is through my email, which is Janet Booth, Booth 15 @gmail.com. I'm teaching a class through the Integrative Nurse Coach Academy, and I have a new class coming up next year that we'll be marketing. I teach with the New York Open Center's Integrative Thanatology Certificate Program, which is a big mouthful. A wonderful, you can look up the Art of Dying Institute, or you can look up the New York Open Center Thanatology. And it's a wonderful series of sessions with a lot of thought leaders from the end of life world, many of whom, or all of whom, are holding a different vision for how to talk about death and dying. It's part of this cultural transformation that's actually happening all around us right now that a lot of people aren't aware of many people from many different backgrounds. And some of them are on the call tonight, because I recognize their beautiful names, who are part of wanting to change how we talk about dying, and are finding a lot of different ways to do it. So I'm doing a fair amount of teaching in those kinds of realms of working both with nurses and with lay people. Mm-hmm. And that's probably enough plugs of the. You already plugged the two books that I was a part of, and I'm in the midst of writing another one right now with a friend. And just trying to keep following that thread that's calling me, and taking these practices in my own life, in the deaths and losses and griefs and joys and transformation in my own life, that to walk this talk, which I do the best I can, not just help other people with it, but I'm living this. It's like my own little research laboratory, and the stories from other people that I have been so blessed by, and it's something I love about being a nurse, is the way people share with us as nurses, because we are safe and we are trusted. I've learned so much about being human from other people, and learned so much about suffering and how to find our way through suffering from other people. And then I practice where I can in my own life. That's sort of the most I can figure out to do.
Beautifully said. And I do want to mention happy early birthday.
Thank you.
Live.
I'm about to turn 65, and I'm so excited because I'm going to go on Medicare, and it's going to be better health insurance and at a lower cost. So anyone who has any trepidation about coming into your 60s, please remember Medicare 65. Yeah. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful I'm still here.
No, that's awesome. Well, Jan, thank you so much. You are amazing. You are an inspiration, and your insights and wisdom into this concept of death while we are alive was beautifully relayed during this talk today. And I hope that people who are tuning in live, thank you so much for staying with us for this past lovely hour with Jan. She is amazing. For those of you who are catching the replay, thank you so much for watching. And until next month, we will come back again with an amazing guest that I have in line. I won't say who it is now, but also a fellow nurse who has paved the way for women, and who is what you called her, a badass nun.
Oh, no. Was it badass nun? No, I think of her as a badass nurse.
You said badass nun in the during our conversation last week. Her name is Gretchen, and she is the founder of Harmony Hill. She is a huge inspiration. So she just, I hope to have her on still for next month.
Talk about someone who has really lived her life with intention and so fully, and been so generous with herself, her life, and her wisdom with others. So that'll be great. Make sure that people come back for that, anyone who's listening. But thank you, Rosie, for the invitation. for you being who you are, and for sharing part of your life, which to me is a testament to everything we're talking about here.
Thank you.
And so blessings on the courage it took in the past to get where you are, and to that word courage taking you into 2022.
Oh yeah, that's coming up. But thank you so much, Jan.
You
everyone
bet.
have a good night, and I will see you next month. Take care, everyone.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.